Now, we will continue. I'm going to read now a few quotes from references to the book of Revelation, which I think is also interestingly connected to Isaiah chapter 48, verse 16. Here we see reference to 7 spirits of the Almighty, alright, which are before the throne of the Almighty. Revelation chapter 4, verse 5. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of the venerable authority. Interesting. Here is a reference to burning lamps, alright? Clearly a metaphor because lamps aren't actually spirits. And it calls them the 7 spirits of the Almighty. Could it possibly be that Revelation chapter 4 verse 5, referring to these 7 spirits as burning ones, fire burning, 7 lamps, be the same as the Seraphim mentioned in chapter 6 of Isaiah? Which possibly, as Isaiah, this is Revelation chapter 4, the same verse, goes on to equate as spirits of God. Could it be that that the burning ones in Isaiah chapter 6 be the one that encountered Isaiah be the spirits that's mentioned in chapter 48, verse 16? I think this is only strengthened by the fact that Revelation chapter 5, verse 6 indicates that these spirits can be sent out to the earth. Now, hopefully this makes a little bit of sense to you, but there may be one more problem. Due to the way the quotations are put into the translation of Isaiah chapter 46 in Christian translations, you may think that it's the speaker, that the speaker in that passage is the Almighty, and then then none of what I say makes sense. But keeping in mind what I said in the beginning of this clip, that capital letters and quotations, and especially quotations and punctuation marks, are added according to the understanding of the translator. And if the translator already believes in the Trinity and is looking for indications of the Trinity and is certain of it and wants to help the readers see what he sees, I don't think it's a stretch that he would put the quotation marks in this passage to help strengthen his argument, which I believe they've done. Now, that's not a problem with my take on the verse. You simply get rid of the quotation marks, which aren't there in the first place in the Hebrew text. The only problem with that, you might think that the way that the speaker refers to being in the beginning in verse 16 of chapter 48 makes it obvious that it's the Almighty. But that's not necessarily the case, because the word there is translated in the beginning is merosh, which simply means the beginning of an occurrence, alright? And it's not a term for being in the beginning in the sense of before the world. People say such and such in the beginning, or I did something in the beginning all the time in regular daily Hebrew speech with the same exact term. Human beings. And you also find in the book of Isaiah itself a reference to judges being restored as they were in the beginning. And you won't assume that that means in the beginning before the creation of the world. So it could just mean that Isaiah is saying he has not kept secret from the beginning of some event that he's referring to, and he refers to it with a feminine form of it, she literally, in this same passage. It could be his nevuah, which is feminine in Hebrew. Nevuah is a feminine word. The beginning of his prophecy. Nevuah means prophecy. Or it could be since the beginning of a certain occurrence, that he hasn't kept quiet since that other occurrence, whatever it is. And if that's still problematic to you, so you can begin the quote after the part where it mentions in the beginning, and insert the quote having the prophet beginning to speak here, where it says, quote, "Now the Lord, the Transcendent One, has sent me." And before this part of the verse, it could be the Almighty. Alright? Indeed, in the Hebrew text, the verse is clearly divided by a special marker between the word "now" and the previous word in this verse, just as the same marker is used in the next verse, verse 17, to separate between the words of the prophet, "Thus says the Lord," and the continuation of what the Lord goes on to say. either of these understandings of the verse make more sense to me for the next verse, where it suddenly begins, "Thus says the Lord," that appears at that appears to indicate that Isaiah the prophet was speaking. Why, in the middle of a prophecy where Isaiah is speaking the words of the Almighty, does he just suddenly say, "Thus says the Lord"? It seems to indicate that he had already been speaking. So whatever way of understanding this verse you may find reasonable, hopefully it is not clear that the verse is not so obviously a reference to the Trinity, especially when you take into account methods of translation, the context and background of the book of Isaiah, and the meanings and uses of the Hebrew words which appear in this verse.